Scientists are seeing signals that COVID-19's alarming Omicron wave may have peaked in Britain and is about to do the same in the U.S., at which point cases may start dropping off dramatically. The reason is because the variant has proved to be so wildly contagious that it may already be running out of people to infect, just a month and a half after it was first detected in South Africa. Dr. David Heyman, the former head of the World Health Organization's Infectious Diseases Department, says Britain is the closest to any country of being out of the pandemic, and that COVID-19 is inching towards becoming endemic. Ali Mokdad, a professor of health metrics sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle, says Omicron is going to come down as fast as it went up. So will this be the same case for Canada? Well, joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Abhishek Raut, medical director at Appletree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks so much for having me.
So some promising news here, Dr. Raut, but let's start with a quick overview of how many Canadians have been infected with Omicron so far.
Yeah, so Canada has documented more cases of COVID-19 via Omicron in the first 40 days than it did in the entire first year of the pandemic. There have been more than 777,000 cases of new confirmed infections of Omicron, and which started at the end of November. In contrast, it took us 370 days to get that same number when we had that first case of COVID-19 in January 25th, 2020. There have also been more than 4 times the number of active cases now than during the peak of the second or third waves in this winter and spring of last year.
So that's very interesting, Dr. Raut. Do you think Canada is at its peak of infections just as Britain may be?
I think we may be entering soon into the place where we'll start to see a decline. Keep in mind, it's very difficult to know when a peak is happening. You literally have to wait until it passes. Having said that, we do have factors we look at to see if a peak is nearing. We look at tests in the community, positivity rates of these tests, and also wastewater analysis. Looking at these 3 indicators, we think we might be nearing a peak, likely in a few weeks. But remember, these are just estimates, but we're very hopeful we'll get there soon.
Hopeful indeed, Dr. Raut. Well, if we reach this peak, will Canada reach this endemic level, as some doctors are speculating about Britain?
Right. I appreciate the underlying question here is, when is this all going to end? And I think the good news here is most experts agree that it will end. We may not totally be able to eradicate COVID-19, but we'll see it move out into an endemic phase rather than a pandemic phase. When we see endemic, what that means is there aren't these crazy large spikes up and down. The reproductive number of the disease is actually very small and also very consistent. We are nowhere near that right now. We still have massive fluctuations and peaks. However, the hope is that we will see these numbers stabilize in the future.
And Omicron is not the first variant of the coronavirus, so how likely are we to see another virus variant pop up and cause an infectious wave following Omicron?
Viruses, especially coronaviruses, are always mutating. Most of the time, these mutations don't change much about a virus, and so we don't even classify it as a variant of concern. But sometimes these multiple mutations can lead to a very distinct variant, which causes far more infections. For example, Delta only really had 13 mutations, and it's been an extremely chaotic variant with high infection rates. Interestingly, Omicron had about 50 mutations, so making it much more contagious than Delta, but not as high a hospitalization rate. So overall, I think we will continue to see mutations occur, and therefore the chances of a new variant is actually quite high.
And considering that Omicron, some early studies suggest Omicron is milder than the Delta variant, what would you say to those who are thinking about catching Omicron and maybe getting this all over with?
We have a surprising amount of data for this. So if we remember, the pox parties back in the day were when people gathered together to get this natural immunity against chickenpox for their kids. And they also did that for measles. So what did we learn from that? So one, we learned that in these pox parties per se, kids got more than just chickenpox and measles. They got sick from strep, staph infections, Hep B, along with many others. And the second and more important point was that children could and still can die from things like chickenpox and measles. So having exposure to these in a form which is better, which is a vaccination, is much safer than the idea there. So the idea of getting it over with an infection can be extremely dangerous.
All right, Dr. Raut, just about 30 seconds left here, but what are your thoughts on these booster shots being recommended for all Canadians?
Right now, what we know is adding a third dose increases the antibody titers by 25 times compared to 2 doses. And the impact of this is protection against getting COVID to up to 75% after the booster. But remember, boosters just force the virus to not produce as much, which means we may see less mutations as well. So from an individual and population perspective, it makes a lot of sense to get those boosters.